What if AI is not just about changing jobs, but breaking the entire logic behind how we hire people, retain people, and pay people, specifically around performance? Welcome to the People Strategy Forum. I'm Sam Reeve, your host and CEO of CompTeam, where we help organizations design people-centered compensation and career systems that attract, retain, and motivate. Today's topic is one that leaders are not talking about nearly enough. When an employee is equipped with the right AI tools, they can produce the output of three, five, or even seven traditional contributors. So, what happens when we are not paying them effectively? Does that impact our retention? And what do we do with workforce design? These people can easily be poached. So, we need to rethink on how we approach this problem. Our guest today is Maximos Lih, founder and CEO of Emboldened. Maximos brings an unusual blend of startup and talent strategy, org design, executive coaching, and operator level excellence that some is difficult for others to replicate. So we're really glad to have him here today. He's advised hundreds of growth stage companies, helped them build hiring systems, people systems, and work at the intersection of talent, execution, and business transformation. So today we're digging into the questions: how should leaders reward and motivate people when their value comes more from leverage than hourly labor? So let's welcome Maximos.
Hello, everyone. Really glad to be here.
Yes, thanks, Maximos, for joining us once again. I know we've talked before on the People Strategy Forum. I'd love to just dive into your expertise around what you're working with right now with AI-empowered startups. And so I know you're working with plenty of those types of firms and leaders. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that where I've had incredible privilege is I spent almost a decade working on the team at Google Ventures. And my job really, even though it transformed a lot during the time that I was there, really was about how do we maximize the rewards and returns of the checks that Google has written out to startups they find interesting. And they could be, anything from health tech to mobile coffee to Nest and Uber and Slack and Stripe. And so what I often have the privilege to do is get a frontline seat on companies that are trying new things that are really taking less is more to an extreme. And what I think is so fascinating about the topic that we're discussing today is that my mandate in 2017, when Google Ventures were mainly interested in Series A checks, right, with $10 million raises, $30 to $50 million valuations, was if I could help you get from 50 to 150 without breaking your quality bar, and 150 to 500 without breaking your culture, you will generate returns. That was almost always the intersection of people and revenue. And today, since I started my own practice 3 years ago, we're seeing startups push automation, tooling, less is more to an even higher degree, not because they're outsourcing, which would have been a cost benefit leverage, in the past, but really saying we have agent-based tools now where I could be a team of 12 people with an ARR of $30 million. And I don't plan to be more than 150 people at the time of exit. Right. And so it's like, is it actually possible to say 50, 100% team can get to $100 million ARR and either get a very profitable M&A or actually a worthwhile IPO in these specific spaces? And so, if you're working at the intersection of people and revenue, and what you're gunning for is $100 million ARR with less than 150 people, everything about the way that you hire, evaluate and retain talent will become unrecognizable from the old days when it was like, how do I get you from 150 to 500 without breaking your culture, and maybe 5,000 if you're thinking international.
That's really interesting. So let's dive into that a bit more in practical terms. So when you have a new startup that comes your way and they're trying to be a force multiplier and with their people, and what's their hiring strategy? They're looking for, I imagine they're looking for people that are really AI enabled, and how do they set up their teams and ensure that they can be that force multiplier?
two biggest differences that I've seen really are happening at the Series A and Series B stages. And for non-startups, I would say, the first 12 to 20 people that you're hiring when you're just trying to build something that doesn't break and not run out of money,
Yeah.
generally your friends, right? There are known quantities of people that you've worked with who have a personal relationship with you, who are willing to take the pay cut on the mission and also just the fun of building something in a garage with your friends. You're not really thinking about them as force multipliers at that point. You're just trying to think about them as, people that want to do this adventure when you don't know what you're doing as a founder. Right. But it's really past that 12-person team, right? When you're like, all right, maybe I think we've got a product we want to try to scale, or maybe I've raised a little bit of money and now I've run out of friends and the expertise that I need to bring in, that you start to actually have that question of, right, what is the first person in this function? What is that role supposed to be like? And how do I actually get them to be better at what I was doing, right, in the job? And sometimes I had a great mentor named Joe Krause who used to say, if you're a founder that's not willing to fire yourself from a job, it's because you haven't seen true greatness in that area. And so I think that that's kind of where a lot of my work, as well as where founders are really getting the most leverage. So two things that are happening. One, and we've spoken about this before, I think it is a gross mistake for founders to be hiring for experience in an AI and agentic world. And it may surprise some of your readers to know that as of this very moment, the internet as we know it is 53 to 57% agents and not humans, which means that the internet is now agentic. So the way that you're trying to get leverage on the internet is not the human first kind of behavior or practices that you think you were working with before. So the experiences of being able to optimize for that may not be very valuable as the agentic internet is growing to 60, 70, 80% agents over humans.
So one thing, let me just interrupt you really quick.
Please.
Can you explain, and when you say that the internet is more than half agentic now, what do you mean by that?
The traffic and the causes of traffic are being done through agents more than they're being done by humans. And you could track that even through, trading on, the stock exchange, right? How much of those transactions are happening because of agents that had rules programmed into them to auto balance for a certain, percentage yield or protect against a certain percentage loss, as opposed to a human that is watching Twitter, looking at analysis, reading the graphs and the candlesticks, and then making the plays in real time. More than 50% of them are now agents that are just automated.
So I would expect that if that's the reality, that we should see that the internet has expanded by 2 times since in the past 5 years. Is that true?
I would say that is fair, but don't underestimate that that's the number of people who are now not actively watching X, right, and candlesticks, and now have the ability to go do something else with the time once they put those automation rules in place. And so I think that that's also where when we talk about leverage and headcount and team size, it's because if I write the right rules, my SEO, right, my manager is just going online looking at how I optimize for the Google or Facebook ads that I purchased, and I am not writing content. I have, a content calendar that Claude is actually churning out, right? And then I have, somebody who is looking at videos and cutting them up into things that I can drip onto LinkedIn. And so then what I'm actually doing is deciding the right what is a prioritization of things, but I have agents that are doing 3 or 4 jobs that used to be occupied by, 3 people between 3 to 7 years of experience.
Right. So let's go back to the small startup example that you were talking about, where we've got our core team of humans that work really well together, and now we're trying to be a force multiplier. So what's the next step that an organization can do to really get that next level of productivity?
Yeah, so I would say the 3 mistakes that most companies are making right now is, 1, they over-index on experience and they're not hiring new grads. And that's a mistake on a variety of different levels. But predominantly just because the experience that you think you would get from those people actually may not create any leverage in an agentic first ecosystem. 2, they are still keeping people in very specific domains. So you think, oh, if I'm hiring an engineer, I should hire engineers to do engineer things and measure them by lines of code, correct? That is not true. Actually, the engineers of the future are always going to be product or UX engineer hybrids, because the one thing that agents cannot do, will likely not do for the next 10 years, is actually be the purchaser.
Mhm.
We are not at a place where we're willing to trust an agent with my credit card information and just say, like, buy the thing. Right. But they will do everything short of that. So then the purchasing behavior will still have a human-based component to it. That means that it's got to be a UX-based or product-based mindset. And more lines of code will be pushed to Claude, to AI tokens. And so my most highly leveraged engineers are the people who understand how something works to get a buying behavior, not the person who writes the most lines of code. And then the third thing is that they underestimate the value of systems thinking. And I'll give you a very specific, concrete example of that. I have a company, they are $30 million ARR, is a 12% engineering team, 20% quality. And their engineering team basically has a system with 3 senior architects are creating a Claude-based framework of how features can get suggested and then translated into prototypes and code. And that layer has a supervisor layer that says, and every time that you actually push out a feature, I want you to do your own unit tests. That's totally automated because I want a zero technical debt system. And then I want you to be able to create agents that go to watch my junior or new grad engineers when they're trying to push things out and write unit tests based off of them. Anything that comes out with a bug, rank that bug on a scale from 1 to 10. If it's a level 4 or below level of difficulty, fix it yourself and run it until it's done. If it's between level 4 and 7, optimize the algorithm that you're doing the rankings for so that you can be able to fix those and push them down to level 3 and below. Anything that is level 8 and above, send it to a senior engineer because I want a human review before it gets pushed to our code base. So they're able to hire 20 new grads within a system with very little understanding of judgment, but get a massive amount of productivity. And it speaks to architects that are not thinking in terms of how do I build something for my own agent, but how do I contribute to a platform-based agent with a supervisor layer, and agent that then makes everybody in the company.
Okay, so let me just make sure that this is clear and understood. You just talked about a structure where AI is pushing the most complex pieces to the senior engineers, and right now we're hearing that there is a lack of hiring in organizations for those entry level jobs out of college and so forth. So, are you saying that those entry level jobs that in this new future organization you're talking about are those that are empowered with agentic knowledge? That they are the agentic managers, and then we have the senior engineers that are just more specialist?
I would say that the movement needs to be away from, let's give everybody a $500 ChatGPT budget to make their own agents. That doesn't actually make the company work better or faster because it's not thinking in terms of workflows. 2, you could have agents that end up competing against each other. And 3, those agents don't belong truly to the company. They can be easily replicated somewhere else. So that system is actually not incentivized to make the company better or protective. So what you need is layers of agents, right, that actually act as government forces over entire workflows. And in that kind of a system, right, where an engineer is understanding the right features and use cases, but not necessarily running their own unit tests. A mid-level engineer with 7 to 15 years of experience is actually going to be ill-equipped to do that system. They will be too tempted to fix the mistakes and get frustrated at the hallucinations that the AI creates, rather than saying, how do I actually teach and train the AI to write better, rules so that I never have to run my unit test again?
Right, gotcha. All right. So how are the organizations of the future setting up their teams and the with the agentic teams? Are the agents used across the organization by multiple people, or are you seeing that there's agentic managers that are responsible for a group of agents?
I would say that we have our agent trainers who are responsible for creating a layer of institutional knowledge that belongs to at the company level is not owned by any single individual. So it's not your knowledge. It's anytime you have domain expertise or knowledge, you're feeding and training the company agent. And then you have, quality control agents that sit on top of that. So imagine if I were to say, hey, I want you to write me a summary analysis of how crypto is working in 2026 and what you think it might look like in 2027. All of us know that it's just a matter of time before I hit hallucinations based off of that. So then I need to say, right, maybe one of three things, right? I need to write instructions that say you value accuracy, precision about being helpful. Do not say with confidence anything that is not 100% foolproof. And then I might say, I want you to create an agent that acts as a fact checker. So that before you actually show me the results, the fact checker agent will review what my analyst agent is writing. And then I have a third one that says, now imagine you are the board of my, financial services LLC, because I'm going to be using these to write investment decisions. Now the board will look at what the analyst and the fact checker would have produced and tell me, if you think this is a risk mitigated, right, a high quality investment that aligns with my investing philosophy and my risk profile. Right. So now I have three layers of agents, right, that might be coming from one person acting in very different roles. But the goal is to make a decision that I actually ultimately have hold responsibility, which is a very different thing, right, than just, let's say, like outsourcing tools, right, to a agent at a single layer that's all flat and horizontal. It's actually creating teams underneath agencies.
Okay, so one thing just want to make clear is that in your structure, are you saying that you mentioned that there's a number of human trainers that are training agents. So is there multiple trainers training the same agent, or were you looking at one human trainer training a layer of agent?
The layer, so the layer agent is an agent. So I think that's something that needs to be really it's still one agent. It's just an agent that is being trained with a goal to improve a company as opposed to improve like me, individual. And that has to be trained by multiple people for the company to retain its IP. And it has to be trained by people that you consider to have judgment. So it's not a democratized training, which is also the fallacy of even if you gain everybody $500 in ChatGPT to train one company agent, I don't want low performers training with the same weight as high performers. I want the high performers to set the rules because they're going to have better quality protection and also a better alignment to the aspirations of where I want.
Okay, let's move to performance and how to measure performance of these future human employees. So, when somebody is contributing to training the agent, how do we know if somebody is more effective in that agent training than others?
I think a lot of that is still actually being designed in real time, but a quantitative metric that I could use is for headcount planning. So if what you have produced actually does allows me to not have to hire an additional head to do the work of scaling whatever dimension you're scaling, speed, complexity, quantity, then that person is a high leverage person. And I tell companies sometimes we should actually seriously consider, and there are companies that are actually doing this right now, we just hold payroll static at 60%. And whatever we don't spend on new headcount goes back to existing headcount. So I could be paying, an individual contributor the headcount of 2.5 people because they created automations that save me money from having to hire, onboard, and train a new person. And it is vastly important that I do actually retain that person at the value that they create.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I imagine, of course, being in compensation myself, there's a lot of different aspects of how we can do this through, gain sharing or incentives and so forth. But that's very interesting, and how we're going to have to bridge this new gap of paying for focusing more on paying for output versus paying for the hours that we have a person doing, a job that we've been doing for
Yeah.
millennia.
And I would say, and Meta demonstrated, I think Meta did some research that actually demonstrated the efficacy of this. But Meta did a research around like work from home productivity. And from that, they learned two things. Work from home disadvantages uh, any junior hires, so new grads, and anybody who has had what we call an L6 or above,
Mhm.
which is essentially anything that is more senior than a technical lead. And they learned that it was for two reasons. One, the peripheral vision and osmosis that a new grad gets from being in the office and being able to eavesdrop, they're massively lowered when people are working from home. And then two, for those senior level technical lead hires, they are not doing the cross-functional collaboration and innovation that actually helps to move the company forward. And for that reason, they pull both of those teams in, and then they started to measure the efficacy of being on site across individuals by saying, my new grads should be writing a lot of lines of code because they're learning judgment and they're learning like what good looks like. But my L6s should be almost not writing code at all. So I should be spending a lot more money on tokens, AI tokens for my L6s and above, because they should have so many cross-functional ideas that they are not dealing in the silos that are actually doing that kind of, much more manual based, but I see line coding. And that's literally how they actually understand the health of those two job families. Is token spend increasing as people get up to seniority, and is cross-functional collaboration increasing as they get closer to seniority? And then from there, you can actually base on, okay, so then of the cross-functional projects that my good L6s are doing, which one of them are creating new lines of business? And that actually then, feedback roots back into exponential compensation.
Okay, very interesting. So I want to dig into what you just said a moment ago about the meta research. I'm a bit skeptical about the hybrid or work from home, or being full on site. So, and I can understand why larger organizations may want to pull people back into the infrastructure. There's a lot of money spent on that infrastructure. But when you're working with small startups that may have really dispersed teams and knowledge that comes from different parts of the world, I mean, it seems to be a little bit more difficult to have somebody, people come into the same space in that small startup. And so when we're looking at the nature of on-site work versus fully remote work, what's your experience with the startups that you're working with? What do they typically do?
Um, Small companies actually like being together. And it goes back to if I always want to tell people and I wanted to build something with my friends, why would I not, want the opportunity to go hang out with my friends while we're building something? So smaller teams tend to like it. And I do find that companies that want to move complexity without sacrificing speed, they do get better results from being on site. Now, there's a lot of job families and industries like enterprise SaaS, or if you're doing government, public sector, where being in the same location actually doesn't make any sense because the market is dispersed. And so how do you prevent the insider or outsider issue, the home base versus, a stepchild second, office kind of syndrome? And in those kinds of cases, I think GitLab, which was a GB portfolio company, set a beautiful example, right? Where they said, if everything is going to be distributed and it has to be writing first, I think that's really fair. You're not going to call meetings because it was convenient. You create a document, and then when you have 5 to 8 comments that don't get to alignment, you call a meeting with those people. The second thing that I think has been really useful that I encourage is don't mandate a 2 to 3 days in the office week. You just end up missing each other, or you end up going into the office and spending most of your time in conference rooms. If you're going to be together, call for spread weeks where everybody's in the same place for 4 to 5 days at a time. The cross-functional, like magic that you want to happen happens when they're in the Uber ride back to the hotel. It doesn't actually happen in that conference room. It happens when they're going to the gym or at breakfast, talking to each other. And you can only do that when you predictably know the person that you're talking to today is going to be here tomorrow. And that's a lot of scheduling if everybody is navigating their childcare. But if you do it for 1 week, a quarter, and then everybody just go home and do your thing, but I know who you are, so when you ping me or Slack me, I know to pay attention to your ask. That actually gets us a lot more.
I see. Now, so let's jump back to the concept of org design, the future org design of organizations. Now, it sounds like that right now there's we're looking at some of the largest organizations out there. They have quite a hierarchy of different levels and so forth. And do you imagine that that stack might shrink in the future, given the agentic way forward?
Most companies are already doing that, actually, as I can tell. You can see Anthropic, OpenAI. If you look on LinkedIn, everybody is a member of technical staff. So they're not thinking in terms of layers or levels. They're really thinking in terms of, are you an architect? Are you a trainer? Are you an implementer? Are you a business, a customer-facing web builder? And all of those things are going to become much less like strident because of experience. Companies that I know also spending much less money on building and management layers, because if I can have agents that are doing the work, then everybody is a manager, and I don't want to pay the admin tax of having a specific first line manager. So I think most of those things are actually contracting as we see it, and you can also see that reflected in revenues for companies like Lattice, like Culture Round, that are building management-based tools. L&D budgets are collapsing as well.
Mhm. So I can imagine that more knowledge-based type organizations, technology organizations will probably be more that manager level. But then when we're looking at more into legacy manufacturing, it may be opposite. Where we might have a more agentic type management or task management, pushing down to humans that might be doing the work, or potentially and those that are robotically enabled, of course, would be different, but I'm talking about those that require manual labor right now.
That's an interesting question. So I the majority of my clients that have a manufacturing are doing hardware design and chip design. And I would say that probably 40% of them overseas based, and then the other 60% here in the United States. And actually, I would say, yeah, plus another 10% maybe in London, just because the government is actually investing in that area. You would be surprised. I think so much of those types of manufacturing orders are getting pushed to foundries instead of companies wanting to take it on themselves. And then what used to be more test-based, quality-based specializations, they're trying to either create or do design partnerships with companies that are specializing in AI-based design tools. And I think it's still a very early stage of startup innovation right now. But the idea of, if I can create a platform that is similar to Cadence, but for quality and testing between when a spec gets locked and when manufacturing can begin, I can shorten that time from 3 or 4 months down to 6 weeks. The leverage that I get over my competitors, as well as the costs that I would save with the headcount of those people who don't have anything else to do for the rest of the year, would be invaluable. And so then they are willing to pay, 100K a year to try to invest in this.
Hmm. Okay. Yes. So specialization, of course. So I want to get back to what you mentioned as far as the flattening of organizations, and specifically in what career pathing looks like in the future. So when of course, when we have a flattening of organizations, the upward momentum of careers somewhat changes its path or gets stalled. So what is your perception of what future career pathing will look like for professionals?
I would not be surprised if most employer-employee relationships do not have a true W-2 relationship in the future
Mhm.
because, and then I'm already starting to see this. Anybody who is at the architect level could create an entire, I mean, a consulting business where let's say, I know what Salesforce is doing in terms of building CRM and sales tools for different companies, but there's data privacy and you're always tweaking it, to a certain extent for your specific company's workflow. Well, with 3 months of time and really good cloud tools, I can go into any company that's 150 people or less and build you your custom instance of Salesforce. I can build you your custom instance of Greenhouse. You no longer need to buy into the larger platform subscriptions because I can build you one. Maybe that costs 50 or 80K for the 3-month project. It's entirely done by 3 people with my platform of agents that are doing their own unit tests. So all I really need to do is figure out the product where listening with on that. And they can go from company to company and just keep doing that. I can be a specialist in internationalization and go from company to company, building out translation models for all the web properties. And that no longer requires a W-2 to get the level of compensation that you used to be at, nor does it really require you to have really good business sense because you're leveraging AI as sort of your work product, right, is now this AI agent set that you manage and are able to take to a company differently.
Okay, so um, so more contractors, more consultants in the future. Does that are those? Do you imagine those contractors or consultants being restricted in working with other competitors as part of the agreement, as a as a going to different organizations? Are you seeing that in agreements?
I'm not actually, and I think that the people who are doing this early probably what we'll have is either competency or project-based employment and less W-2 title-based employment. It changes the way that companies do budgeting as well around skills and workforce. Now, and really the big lock-in for a country like the United States is then where does the healthcare, benefits come from? But there's a lot of flexibility now on being able to say efficiency is going to be a commodity if everybody is buying the same tools, and then is actually your ability to use the tools almost in a rental model that's actually going to get you, your employment compensation. And some employers will really like that because it means that everything is a try before you buy review-based system, right? Not necessarily hiring based on potential anymore, but, like any other type of equipment or competency, hey, I'm a winery. I only need to bottle wines, 2 weeks a year. It costs me, 100K to rent something, but it would have cost me $2 million to buy or build it myself. I would take it, right? And then they get to do it with, sort of like an entity whose bug fixes are tried and true, rather than build it yourself where you're going through so many iterations of messaging.
Okay, I want to jump on something else that you mentioned. It's a little off topic, but you were saying that your example was SaaS companies, and right now, of course, there's the big SaaS complex that people are talking about, the destruction of SaaS companies. Is that something that you see continuing on into the future?
I guess I would be curious what you think and what did they mean by the destruction of SaaS companies?
Well, you just mentioned as far as you made a couple of examples as far as Salesforce, Greenhouse, building internal systems that replicate those systems they can make them more customized internally.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I would say that definitely with the incumbents should be concerned that the network effects, uh, you if you're not getting a data layer for how I measure against my competitors in a way that's valuable to me, then being part of a huge conglomerate with an existing workflow may not actually be that useful, and certainly not with the cost as I scale. I think that there's going to be, right, like any company that is not playing I'm trying to use AI to be 150 people or less are still going to get so much standardization protection from using some of those larger systems, and maybe even just the internal data transfer and dashboarding would be useful for them to keep paying it. But for companies that are much more in the startup space, the build out yourself value will become much more clear.
Great. Thank you, Maximus. Another great conversation. So as we kind of wrap up our discussion today, what are the top things that leaders should be thinking about when as the workforce becomes more agentic empowered?
So I would say I'm doing a lot of headcount planning right now with my clients. And the question that I continue to ask is, are you sure that you're not hiring more people because that's the path of least resistance, but that is surely the edge of your automation one? So I think that that's extremely important to ask. The second thing that I do is there's a identity change that needs to happen when the CEO. I say, I generally would tell people, when you're a Series A company, if you're 50 people or less, you are the judgment, you are the taste, you are the voice of the culture, and you set the standard for excellence. That is the shorthand, right? Series A is just a shorthand for when the CEO is still doing some IC work and, oftentimes acting as the first line manager. But in an agentic universe, you almost want to move out of that as quickly as possible and start asking the question, who holds the quality standard, excellence, right, business strategy when I'm not in the room? And immediately start to empower those people to become your AI trainers. Because like I said, right, if you have people of varying degrees of judgment that you don't trust or do trust, training AI models, what they do is they just scale the bottleneck, right? They just scale the bad judgment. They just make hallucination worse for somebody who can't tell the difference between good and bad. And so if you want to start actually doing that, like make sure that that layer gets protected. And then from there, you can start to design the compensation principles of saying, is that person worth 2 heads? Is that person worth 8x what meets expectations looks like? Google did research very early on where we realized that a great algorithms engineer, it generates, I think it was like at least 10x, if not more than that, right? The ads revenue of somebody who is just barely meets expectations. And so then the curve, but in those bands went up very, very high. Somebody who was a high performer can make 8 to 10x more than, somebody who is just starting in the same job and with the same exact job title, because we just saw that performance like earn out. And it was not competitive or sustainable for us to not pay them at the risk of going to our competitor with everything that they've learned in the time that they were at our company. So it was always better to pay the extra money to like pour the talent here so that they didn't go to a competitor or in our new ecosystem, so that they didn't become a consultant charging you more money than you would have paid their salary to do the same work that they used to do for you. And how many have we seen that? I've seen that happen over and over again in the nonprofit sector. I used to be your grant writer that you pay 60K. I am now the consultant of Grant Writers, LLC with, successful grants in my portfolio, and I charge you 150K to do this project to write grants for you.
Yeah, right. The future for sure. All right, for our listeners out there, here's what I want you to take away from this conversation. The AI-driven companies that figure out how to pay for impact, not hours, not titles, not out of date benchmarks and so forth like that. Those are the ones that are going to attract and keep the best talent in this new world. So we're not talking about the distant future. This is all happening right now. And if you're someone, you or someone on your team who's using AI in a way that Maximos has been talking here, that produces the output 3 to 5 people, and you need a compensation strategy that reflects that, reach out to us here at CompTeam, because we can definitely help you with that. If this conversation got you thinking, please subscribe to the People Strategy Forum and share this episode with your HR team, your CEO, or your board. We see the world changing pretty quickly, so make sure that you're in front of the game. Until next time, pay people for the value that they create, not the chair they sit in. And we'll see you next time on the People Strategy Forum. All right. Take care, everyone.